this is going to be my initial checkout session, if you will. We will find that this is not a standard 400, which is currently available. This is a 0.1, as we can tell from the physicalities of it outwardly. I've seen some videos in the process, kind of looking into it a little bit, and it's going to be hard for the saw shop guys, I think, when somebody comes in a year or whatever, and customers asking about getting a part for a 400, and they may or may not know they have a 400.1. Maybe that's, I don't know, by design, maybe not. Fancy orange paint, that's super awesome. We're going to look at something real quick because I'm hypothesizing that this is off of my 462 from 2017. Literally, that's the same cover that came on that. No, that's not true. It came with this one of these like that. This actually came off of a Rex you saw. I figured it out. I don't even know how. I ordered one and got this bigger cover, but interesting how it fits right on there. I had hypothesized that this saw is supposed to be coming with the wrap kit OEM fitment, so it's not going to cost an arm and a leg to get the wrap version of this saw. I had hypothesized that they would be using this clutch cover. If we take a look at, you may or may not be able to see down there, but with the studs lined up with the nuts on the half wrap cover, you can see the bolts are protruding. They want to come through the existing holes in the half wrap version that came on this saw, which tells me a couple of things. A, they didn't change that part completely. Whether or not the inside dog is mounted in the same plane XYZ, that'd be 3-part space right there. That's unclear at this stage of the game. I haven't gotten that far. We're just kind of checking it out. So we found out that that's exactly going to be a workable item. The other thing we're noticing is, I had watched a video, I don't know, at least a year ago, and they were talking about the weight of this machine. I think it's 12.2 according to the factory. The 400 that's currently available is, and that would be the half wrap saw, I think it's 12.7 or 12.8, so it could be 12.6. I don't remember. I didn't look it up. I don't know how important that actually is. The bottom line is this saw weighs less. It's also down in displacement. If you want to talk about that real quick, it's 62.6 cc's, where the standard 400 is 66.7 cc's, so it's down 4.1 cc. This particular saw right here, even though the claim to fame on this is only 1/10 of a horsepower less, I'm kind of curious to see how they managed to make that part happen. It looks like it has similar shape with the transfer port circuit coming up through the front. They've kind of been going to that more so than the ones coming up in the side. We'll take a look at that 362 400 concept. Well, the 362 concept, the 400 concept is more like this, with the current 400, that is. But I segued off because you see stuff and then you want to make sure you mention the stuff that you're seeing before it escapes. All you young people out there, enjoy your youth because things change. Anyway, I was watching this video and they were, I don't know, making a fuss about the case design. You can see it's pretty beefy up in the front where the bar studs are. I mean, it kind of makes you wonder conceptually, but this is really similar to what's going on with the current 462, and I have not heard where a bunch of the cases are cracking apart. So I was watching that video and there was, I don't know, complaining, whatever, about the concept of the case design in this particular saw. It's basically a baby 462. Case in point and supporting argumentation, we can see, I think we can see anyway, that it's got a big beefy block up in the front of magnesium, pretty thick casing, where the bar studs are kind of going to put pressure on with the bar. So you wonder, like a long bar situation. And it's got the small, I think you can see that, magnesium case situation. It's not quite as small as this saw, but again, we're down like quite a bit. It actually looks like it's a little wider up in the front right here. Goes past that bar stud a little bit further. Pretty beefy up in the front. If we look at that again, we can see the differential. A little beefier actually up in the front down low on the .1. So it's probably relatively tough, and a guy would like to think he could run a little bit longer bar. Me, on a personal level, I would only be running, I don't even know. I'd have to like get one rolling and see what it would be good for. On my personal 400, which again, we're up 4 cc's, 4.1 from this saw, I run 99 to 100 drivers, that length of bar on that saw. So I run quite a bit of bar on that little turkey, and it runs about the same as my 462 does with a 31. I run about 103 drivers on that particular saw. So anyway, kind of interesting in concept. If we look at the shroud, we can see it's got some pretty fancy, I don't know what you call this process where they have these angular differential pieces on it. It's maybe more aerodynamic so you can get through the woods faster, maybe the brush faster. Maybe that's what they're trying to do with that. Or maybe it's just a look thing. But here is a shroud off of a 362 or 400. You can see, if you line up the screw right here, it's actually wider in this area across the back of the bottom of the carb box. It's kind of Husqvarna-esque. It's like, feels long and skinny to me. Maybe that's just because it is skinny. I find that to be kind of interesting. So this part of the case right here is quite a bit more narrow. The front part of the case up here doesn't seem to be too much different. If we're taking a look underneath the hood, which is like, yeah, get with it, buddy. You pull the shroud. You can see in there how it's much more narrow. Same basic operation, just a little different. First thing we're noticing is this huge air cleaner. So this is an air cleaner off of a 462, essentially. This is the standard 362 400. I mean, the surface area differential is huge. That's going to let the saw run a little bit easier. The air is going to get to the engine a little easier, if you will. I've also noticed where, or let me rephrase that. I've been made aware of this polyolefin material isn't the best necessarily for flowing air, but essentially it's pretty forgiving when it comes to like the fuel blowback that comes from like before the intake side of the charge system shuts down from the piston. There's back pressure coming through that's coated with fuel, saturated with fuel. if you will. And this polyolefin material resists like gas really nicely. But what they're doing now is they're decreasing, I don't know if it's the thickness or they're increasing the pore size, but the new filters are coming in and they're weighing less than the older filters, which means they're trying to increase the flow to the engine, which helps increase the horsepower, which that lends itself to go, okay, well, maybe that's what's going on to a degree with the differential between the 400 and the 400.1. You're running a little tiny air filter that's more restrictive than normal. This thing only flows like, I don't even know. Can't remember CFM. It's not much, 30 to 40 or something like that. This one flows like 60 to 70 or something like that. So it flows a lot more air, and air is exponential. It's like pipe size. You get a 6-inch pipe, flows 50 cubic feet of like whatever volume's going through it. You get an 8-inch pipe, it flows like 150 cubic feet or whatever that ends up being. I'm just throwing numbers out, but it's like an exponential concept. So the headroom in this is going to allow you to run longer, but it's going to allow the air to get through there a little easier than this little restrictive thing. So that's probably some of where they're getting their increase in horsepower from. And then if we want to look at the baffle, if you will, seems like it's a lot more restrictive compared to what we see here. You have air coming in here, air coming in on the bottom. I guess we could take that apart and look at it. We have a full complement of tools laying on the bench because I had no idea what was going to be required of this operation. Looks like they're using the same nut, which, I mean, that makes sense. So we have a two-part cage design. It's coming in on both sides and underneath. This has even got a little facet on it where it's kind of knife-like, letting it swoop around there nicely. They're probably trying to decrease the turbulence, if you will. This filter base is not the same as what we see on a 462. They're standard like this. This is a used one. The 462 baffle, if you will, is like this. So it's not as well thought out with the design. This is a lot smoother operation, getting it headed into the throat of the carburetor. I will mention that. Filter base is, this is using the same style of attachment points as what we see in the 462. Okay, it's a little bit different back in the bottom of the filter base than the standard 362 400 concept, but we can see how it's much smoother, the process of getting the air in there. We have these two reliefs right here coming into the side. Essentially lets the air get down going through the bottom, and it's actually separated, you can see, top to bottom, versus the fresh air coming in through the throat of the carburetor. They changed the shape of this operation, or the location. This little hookup thing was going this way. It's weird that they have the heat shrink tubing stuff on here, but it's down here instead of up over across the top of this nipple for the pulse side of the equation. I think that's interesting, if not weird. Like, who builds this stuff anyway? It appears that the throttle linkage concept is the same so far anyway. Sometimes it helps if you get a little bit of relief on the ends of those nipples, the rubber that fits around the end of the nipple. Same kind of concept as a 462, carburation wise. This is a baby, that might even be one off of a 462. Maybe that's how they got some of their power as well. So if we look at the standard 400, we're looking at it from the same concept. They go on like this. You can see it's the air flowing through this part down here, goes all the way through straight into the crankcase. If I had to bet, I'd say there's more airflow capability here just because of the shape of it. There might be a little bit more volume-wise coming through this side. I don't really know. You'd have to kind of look into that a little bit further. But essentially, the raw air is... If we, like, get the choke on for a second here, bumbling along with that one. So when you open the throttle, you get a delayed response. So you're getting quite a bit of delay before the raw air hits the system. If we look at it like that, you're getting that much out of that much movement. So maybe it's a quarter, because this is basically... The way this is shaped, it's increasing the process of how fast it opens. The further you go back, the more you're opening it, the quicker you're opening it. You're still running raw air into the circuit. I guess we could leave that laying here. We will be able to figure out which one's which. That's guaranteed. This is separated going through the concept of the Venturi. I kind of prefer this process right here. And again, that might be part of the reason why this machine flows better. And creates a little bit more horsepower, or a little bit less if you want to talk about it, compared to the 400, but a little bit more than what we're dealing with the 362, even though it's only up about 3 cc's, I think. They're about 60, they're 59.9 or something, the 362. And this saw 62.6, I believe that's the number. So essentially what you're talking about is maybe close to 3, it's 2.7 or something like that. We'll switch gears for just a second, look underneath the hood. Clearly I have my box of parts over here. I don't know what was going on. I have the process being worked on, but similar in concept for sure. I think we're realizing that this is a lot more narrow, this 400, than the stock, the 400.1 than the stock 400, or what we call stock 400 now, or what I'm calling stock 400 now. This does not fit on there. You can tell that either this is a lot more thick right here, this boss is a little thicker but not much. Maybe that's what's causing the grief, but it's not the same design, doesn't actually bolt on there. Whereas the 362, 400, current 400, they use the same thing. We look at this situation here. We have the injection that runs it into the plenum for the carburetor. Same kind of concept, flywheel wise. This is one of my 400s, 362 400 kind of flywheel. This has the 462 flywheel, or I'm willing to bet it's the 462 flywheel. I don't think they're any different in diameter, though. I think they're the same diameter, but it looks similar to 462 in there. The calipers weren't super handy. 4.32 on that flywheel. If we look at standard 400, we have, it's basically the same. It's 4.17 versus 4. It's a little smaller. It depends on if I'm like doing it right too. 4.32 maybe. 4.18. So it's a little smaller in diameter, but it's pretty beefy. The flywheel on the 400, it's not quite the same. Kind of have stuff scattered around in here as we're doing our thing. The tanks are definitely not the same. The 400 runs a spring like basically perpendicular to the line of this operation here. We can see the spring runs this way as opposed to this way. Again, 462 baby version 462. Similar situation with the actuation of the throttle. Just has this rod here, so that's similar. This concept right here is 462. This side of the manifold looks suspiciously like the 462 as well. The front side of it, however, looks like the 500i. It's completely different the way they're bolting that on. This all kind of one unit, the bottom of the carb box and whatever you call this part right here. I've never actually had to order one of these, so I've never really paid much attention to what you call that. It's separate. Probably going to be a little bit easier to work on this particular saw versus this if you need to take the whole process apart. That would be my guess, just looking at it. Standard operation with the yellow ground wire over here on the flywheel side. This comes out easier than what you would realize on a 462. This comes off like super easy. Again, well, I mean, that bolts on kind of like the 500i. And the 400, 362 kind of concept, I guess. I was looking in from the other side. It's got the little doohickeys on the side, reminding me of the 500i. The little locating portion. It's got a little cylinder. Canted back, fin design. They're trying to get the air to roll through there a little bit better. Maybe I should use my power tool. Yes, I should do that. I don't think I have a set of half wrap handlebars hanging around here anywhere for one of these saws. Same concept as what you see in the 362 400. It looks real similar to this. They got the little bushing thing in there, helps prevent the movement. Spring mounted, the same kind of concept. The two bolts going in like that are real similar. If we look at like a 400 wrap handlebar operation, it has the same concept of the 462. I'm going to bet dimes to donuts that when the wrap version of this saw is available, that handlebar will look suspiciously similar to the 400 also. So if we want to like get rid of, they're using the short bolts like the 500. These are 32.5 or something versus the 40 millimeter long bolts that come with like the 462. Again, the 462 came into production like in 2017, I think it was, early in 2017. So that's like 9 years into production, which means they were designing that saw 4 to 5 years before that. Things have kind of transpired over time, and we have a different situation going on over here. With this saw, it's much later in the process, so they've kind of copycatted some stuff. This looks 462-esque. Down to the rubber. We'll look at that in a minute when we get it out of here. I should probably take the ones out of the case though. Duh. Same short 32.5 bolts. They're not designed to come apart easy. I prefer the Husqvarna stuff, if I was to be completely honest. Yeah, back to the get the bolts out dummy. So with that being said, this all looks just like conceptually what you see on a 362/400 down to this part right here from what I remember. It's different up here. I'm going to bet dimes to donuts these handlebars aren't working on this saw, just because that's my guess. Well, maybe they might. Nope, the mount, the bolt pattern is kind of similar. They're not quite the same geometry. They're off a little, but we tried. They're further forward, and the spar that goes to the rear isn't in the right place. The holes aren't in alignment. So standard 362/400 wrap doesn't fit. We've explored that. Wait, as long as this is the 400 version. Too many handlebars hanging around here. Here's 462. This is off my original saw. I actually made the wrap portion of this operation. I guess we'll just try it and see how bad I bumbled that one. Yeah, that was the 400 set. That's what I thought. Been hanging around for a while. Completely in a different plane. This saw, because it's smaller and lighter, they have it set up differently. So there's that. I thought that was the 400 set just hanging out right there. Lucky me. God was smiling on this operation. So if we look at taking it further apart, like I said, I wasn't sure what was going to be necessary to get this thing apart. So I kind of have a complement tools laying on my bench here. Sometimes it'd be nice to be able to get the training that the factory guys do. So evidently there's and hopefully you can see that. Right here is a little hook that's molded into the plastic, and if you pull that to the side, this section of the connector kind of falls right out of there. I'm really curious to see if they put a full circle crank in this saw finally. If they did that, that would account for a lot of the increase in horsepower. These were loose conceptually. They generally use Loctite, the blue colored Loctite down low. The upper screws were like kind of loose, actually. Way looser than I'd want to run. You can see the blue Loctite there. You can see me bumbling along with my fingers. It's past lunchtime. I'm hungry. That makes it hard to focus. Oh, falls right off. Interesting concept. It's like the 562 muffler design, the way it's laid back and swoopy. Hot exhaust bouncing around here and then hitting the small hole. Like this hole is really small. .43 for very small hole. I'm going to go with when they test this saw for the North American market with the screen coming in. This is actually called an exhaust casing. The muffler conceptually is this part right here. This is the casing. So when they put the fire screen in the casing, that horsepower number is going to drop a little. They always seem to, because you have less ease of exhaust getting out of the muffler. Now they didn't spare any kind of like beef on getting these tight, which I'm thankful. I do appreciate the two-part muffler casing concept in saws that are on the Stihls. Wow. Blue Loctite as well. Shorty bolts though. Saving weight everywhere you go. These are 5mm down low, but they're long. 25mm. Funky shaped gasket. Oh, we got a little tube going in there. Okay then. I don't know if this is a stability thing or what this is. Those two parts right here, I don't know what the heck's going on with that. It's kind of interesting. Standard issue cooling plate. This is really thin though. So I know it is super lightweight. It's about 1mm. It's just a shot. It's about 1mm thick. Weightless. Not a magnesium piston in there, which there's a lot of scuttlebutt about how that wasn't working. They have the standard 2-ring slug in there. They have the little rubberized metal gasket, so we're going to take the cylinder off too and actually take a peek in there. See what we can find. Which means we're going to have to figure out how to dismantle this part right here. Similar situation what we see with the 400. So similarly with the 462, they have it running through a little tang situation down underneath there. We see all the little, I don't know what you call these little farby-doos down here in the bottom of the carb box for running like extra wiring. I guess that means they're going to do a Arctic version because then you can run your wires in there. That would be my guess. So I just ran a pick in there and kicked it out so that when you go to, well, when I go to take the cylinder off. Oh yeah, before I forget, we have the standard CMR 6H that comes in a lot of the new saws that they're doing. They got right with it, tightening these down. Curious to see what's going on with this case situation in here. Since I'm sensing new design. Let us hope and pray that when they put this together, they don't have a bunch of little pieces of aluminum hanging out down there in the gasket, which I see a lot. So there's a bolt in the back of this thing, which I don't know if you can see. Right here. I don't know if you can see that bolt. It's kind of hanging up on the bottom of the carb box, I'm noticing. So I don't know if that means you just Frankenstein this thing off of here. You'd think that you heard it pop, so you'd think that they'd have that figured out. And we have a baby 462 assembly right here. It's exactly the same design, a little bit different shape. They have this little part right here. So you can see where the difference in like a 462, however, maybe you can't see. I'm not taking that piston off. I would like to see what size that bearing is. It looks like it's the standard smaller size that came in the original 400 462. It doesn't look like they beefed it up to me to 462 size. You want to take a look at that. That's what I'm guessing. The rod is super cool. They went back to their roots from the 084 from that thing came out in 1986, I think it was. I don't remember exactly. That's a long time ago now. I'm thinking you can see that the rod has reliefs, one down low, one up high. It's a little teeny tiny rod though. It's like small. They put this part in here to help, I think, with the pumping of the charge essentially on the front side. The original 462s were on the back of the case. And then some of the saws they're bolting in, like the 461, the 500i's in the back. The new 462 cases are in the front. Again, they started life in the back. They're trying to direct the charge, take up volume, I would imagine. There's not a full circle crank in here. Bummer. It's kind of interesting how these cases aren't in perfect alignment up in the front here. You can see there's this side sticks out further than this side. You can see it back here also. It has a step. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe I'm just being picky. They have changed the cases quite a little bit from the 400. This area right up in here is quite a bit different. We'll look at that in a second. I thought they might have some reliefs in this area right here. Oh, they actually do in the back over on this one side. I'm surprised they don't have the other 3 corners taken care of that way. Weight saving is kind of a situation, but standard silicon, aluminum, I don't know, whatever the proprietary blend is for the piston. It's not the mag piston like what we see in a 400. I mean, I guess we might as well take this whole thing apart. Wow, you gotta like tweak on the intake manifold a little bit. I don't know. I don't necessarily appreciate that on a personal note. They don't make ball torques, which those would be nice in this application. Well, at least that I know of, they don't. Okay, so we have those laying here. Yeah, let us not wreck something that we can't actually go down to the store and buy. Store being the saw shop. Okay, so like, there you can look at the inside of the intake manifold as it bolts onto the back side of the cylinder. Take a look at the 400 version. The fresh air volume is greater. The charge is greater. That's getting into the standard 400. Chow time. That's really interesting. I'm having a hard time just going, yeah, they did this and they did that and they did this and they did that, and then they ended up with like a whole bunch of horsepower of this little tiny engine. So we want to take a look down in that cylinder. We can see that it's standard operating procedure with like the 462. The 400 is like that as well. 500i is not like that necessarily because it doesn't have raw air going in there. But the transfer ports, though, with those other saws like the 500 and the 462 and the standard 400, they're real similar in design to what we see right here. I noticed that they're really wide. So that could be part of the equation with the horsepower. I mean, if you look at the transfer ports, look pretty good size, actually, volume-wise. The start of the transfer port circuit anyway. If you look at the exhaust port, it's really wide. It's not overly tall. If you look at the combustion chamber, that's where you're getting some of the power increase, is because there's There's a multitude of things going on with that combustion chamber right there. So first of all, it's really small. The 181s that came out in this country in 1982, which I actually bought one in 1982 because I was falling timber back then. But anyway, they had a real similar concept, only their combustion chamber was in the middle as opposed to back toward the rear. So it was like somebody took a golf ball and just pushed it in the top when it was molten. And it was a really small combustion chamber. Of course, they had like a lot better fuel back then. So this looks surprisingly like 181-esque, if you will. The 066, they're not like that. Even the 056, if you want to take that saw, they had a dome piston, so it was more like a dome-shaped combustion chamber in the center. This is pirated from those old other crafty guys over there at Dolmar. If you look inside of a Dolmar combustion chamber, it's kind of like this situation, super small combustion chamber volume conceptually. What's going on with the having the combustion chamber in the back of the cylinder, this is the back, opposite the exhaust, is because here's where most of the heat is, up in the front, because you're running the exhaust out through the exhaust port. And if you're running that combustion chamber toward the rear of that cylinder, it's operating cooler. Look where the fins are, right? The fins are pulling the heat out. The exhaust is pulling the heat out, and it's going to be a little cooler in the back. That's a horsepower gain right there, from a standard like 400 process. If you want to look at the 362, which basically that's the same concept, we look at the transfer ports in that saw are really huge as well. This is something that was roached I got from the saw shop just looking at things. Exhaust port isn't quite as wide as what we see in the .1, so that's going to help with power, getting rid of the exhaust in a hurry. If we look at the size of the oval in the exhaust port coming out, we see they're relatively close to the same shape and size, but we can actually see though that the exhaust coming out is getting funneled down quicker than what we see in the 362, which is basically, that's the same as the 400. The exhaust, the muffler basically has this also Dolmar-esque situation going on, where you're bumping this flange up against that recess right in there. If we look at it, we can see it is outside of the exhaust just maybe a little teeny tiny bit, depending on, it's basically outside the step, so the exhaust is able to flow directly through into this little tube, if you will. I don't know if they're going to call that an SRL tube. SRL, yeah, I think that's what it is, SRL on the Dolmar, but conceptually this is like the newer version of the 7910 kind of concept. I mean, they're both coming out of Germany. It kind of makes you wonder if some of the guys designing those saws are also involved in designing this saw. I always wonder that kind of stuff. Bolt patterns offset in the back quite a bit more wide, for whatever reason, I have no idea. Again, we talked about the piston already. If we want to look at a 400 piston, we can see that this is the magnesium version. They were holding it here and here while they coated it with their ceramic, which they won't ever admit of what it actually, this material is. We're going to have to wait till we're actually going to tear one of these down. We'll weigh the differentials between the pistons. I'll probably weigh this piston now, although I think I can probably leave this project on hold since it's for myself, until we get around to doing one of those and have a follow-up look-see, if you will. But these pistons are super light. For the life of me, I don't know why they didn't continue. I've abused mine. The tolerance, or excuse me, the clearance between the bore and the piston in these is like 4.8, pretty consistent. That's going to allow for the expansion of the magnesium because it's going to span more so than what we see with the standard operating. Whatever the slurry mix is that they're using, aluminum, silicon, whatever it is, in the standard pistons. But I didn't do a bunch of extra warming up. I worked in the snow. I've worked in the heat. I just ran it like normal, trying to abuse the crap out of it and see if it'd hold up. Haven't had any problems. And I bet I've cut 500,000 with my 400, 500, somewhere between 500 and a million I've cut. I use that thing a lot. I've just used it a lot over the years. And so I don't think there's much of a differential between the 400 combustion chamber in stock form versus the 362. It's just going to be a little bit bigger bore. But definitely a takeaway from like what we see with the 362, like we're 462 400 side, or excuse me, design with the transfer port concept. At least the initial takeoff were actually, I think we're more wide with the 362. The 400, which I'm not going to show because I got stuff going on. I would say, just speculating, that the transfer ports are relatively the same in the 400. And if I was to guess, they're a little bit more narrow in the 362, narrow height-wise, not narrow width-wise. They appear to be about the same width in the bore. But they have like these 4 transfer ports rolling in through there. That's why I think they're kind of limited. It's more restrictive even though there's 4 of them. So I kind of talked about briefly going through the process. Same air injection, I think I mentioned that. It just looks like a baby 462. This isn't as thick, unlike a 462. So the weight savings is like definitely a thought process with what they're trying to do. We'll take a look at the bore on this operation just to verify what we have here. So what is that, 50 millimeters, 49 millimeters? Yeah, it's 49 millimeters essentially is what they're calling that. So it's not 50, it's 49. So I'm going to go with the stroke is the same as the 362 and 400. Nope, this seems like the stroke is less now too, if I got my mathematics right. Let's see, we're going to start over. And that's not coming out right either. I must have pushed the wrong button in the first go around. Okay, 49, so you do, to get volume, you have to do basically pi r squared. Pi is a representative number that I don't know it out to very many places. I only know 3.141592. I think that's what it is. Pi times r squared, which is the radius squared, which is half of the diameter, is the radius, times the length of the movement, gives you the volume of the displacement. That's how that's worked out. So if we take, and it's a 49 millimeter bore. So if we take 24.5 squared 24.5 squared is like 625. We times that by pi, 3.141592. I always do that. Get it close enough, I guess. Times 34, we're assuming that's the stroke, and we have 64.11. Okay, 32 millimeter stroke came out at 60, the same as like, well, right at the same as the 362. So if we take 600.25, which is r squared, times pi, 3.141592, times 33, just for kicks, because that 500i has a weirdo 34.6 millimeter stroke, I think it is. So we're going to do 33, and the stroke, I think it is, equals 62.2. So it's got a weirdo length stroke compared to most things, except for the 500i. It is super weird with that 0.6 number. So to get to 62.229, which you'd say it's 62.2, which is what they claim that saw to be, it's got a 49 millimeter bore and a 33 millimeter stroke, which for whatever reason, that works out well making power. There's some other things that help with the process. They're probably going with the suction effect with this tube. That would be my guess. They're trying to work on that part of the equation. We have a much simpler situation with the carburetor compared to this operation, which I prefer this operation here. I don't know if these people ever like just do one thing and then like dyno test and then do something and then dyno test and then do something and dyno test to come up with like if things are actually helping and hurting, or if they do it theory, plug it into what is that? Yeah, NSI, and get some help from that, or whatever you might want to call it. I'm not really positive where they're getting all this awesome horsepower. Me, on a personal level, when you're doing saw stuff out in the woods and you're running a long bar, displacement is king. That's just what I found it to be, except with my 461, for example, there's some things about that saw that make it a little bit better than a 500i. Once you do something besides just stock form, they don't compare in stock form, of course, but once you tweak things a little bit, they compare to the point where they're winning. There's some things with the old school. I'm not a fan of this air injection monkey business because they're dumping raw air into the circuit. Literally, it's a metered air leak. So what's happening is the piston goes down and it gets, raw air gets into this area right here, and it's going up and essentially like forcing the raw air into the process. It comes in, it's going down, the raw air opens up, it's stuffing it into the transfer ports. Basically, they're trying to create a barrier at the start of the transfer port circuit that is basically a timing thing where the charge takes longer to get in because there's a barrier of raw air in front of it. That's generally the concept. And so that's why they run like you hit a light switch. They kind of like the old Elsinore 125s. They're kind of like all about it, but they also run kind of hot because they're running raw air in there, trying to get a stoichiometric relationship of air to fuel at 14.7 to 1, which is supposed to be complete fuel burn, which reduces your hydrocarbons. So they're working on all of this stuff while they're coming up with these new and wild and crazy ideas. I wish that there was a little bit more. We should do like a forum thing where like they have to take answers ask questions and take answers from their constituents and see if something would be different. Yeah, LOL on that one. Anyway, we kind of took a look at this. We're not running this saw anytime in the near future that I know of. It's just we got an opportunity to take a look at it internally. It's been kind of it's been interesting and it's kind of cool. We got to look at some really cool things. some pretty standard things that are going on right now. You can tell they're trying to like coax more power. It is lighter weight. It's down on displacement a long ways. Claimed horsepower is almost the same. At some point we're going to run this against the stock 400 and then we'll know for sure. So with all that being said, long drawn out, but I warned you in the beginning. I did bumble along a little bit in the process, so I'm only human. It's just the way that it works. Nobody's perfect. But we did get to take a look at something pretty cool, and we made it out on the other side, and nobody's scathed too bad. So thanks for watching this session. Have a blessed day wherever you might be on his green earth.